Hello everyone. So we are live here on our webinar platform and also on our YouTube channel. So for the ones who is watching us right now on YouTube, if you would like to take part in the discussion and ask questions, please register by the link that you see in the stream description, because the comments for in YouTube are blocked for this session. So welcome everybody to the webinar. Today we talk about e-invoicing and instant payments, and precisely how integration of request to pay and e-invoicing by the banks will allow to bring more value for SME customers and also additional revenue for the banks themselves. My name is Olena Grynuik. I am CE Director at the SME Banking Club, and I will be your host today. And my guest today is Katalin Kauzli, co-founder and business development director at Charlie India, which is an e-invoicing provider. And also Katalin herself is an ambassador of the e-invoicing implementation and interoperability of invoice data here in the CE region. Hello, Katalin, and I'm very happy to have you today.
Hello everyone.
Okay, so before we go to our topic, let me mention very shortly the organizational information. So we will start from the presentation. The webinar is scheduled for 45 minutes. We are recording this webinar, so right after we finish, you will receive the link to the video and the presentation itself. After the presentation, we will have a Q&A session. So we will have time for questions and answers. And as we see that there are many subject experts here in the webinar room today, so please do ask your questions or just comment what you think on the topic here on the chat, on the go, even during the presentation. So we would like to have a really discussion in the second part of the webinar. So let's go to the topic. As I mentioned previously, and I do consider that e-invoicing combined with request to pay should be included into the core, into the main SME banking offer. So not consider it as a value-added service, but to be a core offer for SME customers. Just because of the one main reason is that it helps to cover liquidity gaps for SMEs, which is which is the most crucial, I would say, challenge and for the SMEs always. So, Katalin, I'm passing the word to you at once. Please tell us how these tools exactly can help, and let's have a discussion afterwards.
Yeah, thank you, Olena. I am sharing my screen. Hopefully it works. Yeah, can you see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so hello everyone. First of all, I would like to welcome everyone at the webinar, and also, as Olena said, if you have any questions, any comments, let us make this webinar a little bit livelier, as there might be people who have been attending previous webinars. So let us make it exciting for everyone. I have been pitching e-invoicing for banks for more than 4.5 years now. And I have been, in the last couple of years, in the last year, I have been thinking why the take-up of this use case is so slow, besides the regulatory environment, which is now catching up. It was slower before it's catching up, but I was also thinking about why this use case is so difficult to understand for banks, and what seems to be inevitable from the outside world. Why is it not inevitable within the bank. And this is also important because of request to pay, because request to pay is really the missing link that connects invoicing and payments. And I think it's very important to understand the implications of request to pay, that it's not simply a service, but it will be a game changer for the bank. And as I thought, I realized that a mindset change is needed, among other things, for the banks. And everyone who thinks about this topic needs to think about it differently, because if we are thinking about an invoice or a payment, if we go back to the concepts and the very basics, what is an invoice and what is a payment, then each of them is really a document which is based on a set of rules, and is and rules the data exchange or information exchange about an economic transaction. So the invoice is also a document. It is governed by the tax and accounting rules, while the payment is also especially an electronic payment is also a document or a message which is exchanged by two counterparties, and it is also prepared based on a set of rules. And if we are thinking about these things, then, in essence, the invoice and the payment conceptually is very similar, or even identical to each other. It's just the rules that are differing from each other that are governing these documents. And I realized that the problem is with the current manifestation of these things, because when we are thinking about an invoice, everyone, at least as of now, thinks of a piece of paper or a PDF image. While when we are talking about an electronic payment, then we are talking about a bank transfer. And it's more closely to our concept of sending an electronic standardized message between banks, while the invoice is really just a piece of paper. We don't associate with the invoice with an electronic data exchange. And I think that is something that needs to be understood, that the manifestation, the current manifestation at least, should not limit what we are thinking about these documents, because from now on, as e-invoicing is coming, the invoice will also be a structured data message, and the payment will also be a standardized structured data message between two counterparties. And if you are thinking about these, then our thinking and how to link the invoicing and the payments will completely change. And why I'm saying this? Because if we are thinking about a purchase to pay or an order to cash process, then you can see that there are different data sets that describe this process. There is always an order, a contract, there can be a certificate for delivery, there is the invoice, there is the payment, and each invoice must be either paid or immediately or needs to be financed from a financing source. But if we have a look at these data sets, then we find that the invoice data is the deepest and widest and richest data set in the purchase to pay process. So this invoice data should be treated as a strategic asset for banking. And when we are thinking about request to pay, an invoice indeed is a request to pay, because if I send an invoice to someone, then I will want to get this invoice paid. And this new request to pay service that has been or being set up in many countries is just the standardization of this rule that an invoice is a payment request indeed. So we should think about both about the invoice, both about the payment and the payment request, and even a financing request in terms of not what needs to be done also, or what is the process for sending or receiving an invoice or a payment or financing, but what is the content of the information that is exchanged between the parties. And this exchange of information can be described in a standardized way. And for this, the best, there are the standards. There are the standards for the invoicing. There are the standards that are already laid down for payments. There are the standards that are already laid out for the request to pay services. So we need to think about all these things, not as about specific use cases, but as a common denominator, a structured data exchange between the counterparties and the service providers. So I think this is the essence of the mindset change that needs to be understood if someone wants really to utilize the value of all this data within banking. And why it is becoming possible? It's becoming possible because e-invoicing is coming all over the world. There are already a lot of regulations in place, for example, in Latin America, India, Kazakhstan, Singapore, Italy, Hungary, Poland, Romania, the regulation is Serbia, the regulation is already there. In some other countries, it's coming, just like in France or Belgium. And there are, besides the regulation, the explicit mandates for invoicing, there are already interoperability initiatives in the US and also the Nordics, which are more of a bottom-up approach. But all these initiatives altogether will mean that the structured invoice data will be available. So all service providers, payment service providers, and banks can work with this structured invoice data. And how this invoice data can help make banking services better. On one hand, as I mentioned, each invoice is a payment or a financing opportunity. So if you have an invoice, it needs to be paid or it needs to be financed somehow. So this will mean additional revenue for the bank. If the bank can capture the invoice when it is created or when it is need to be paid, then it can keep or make these invoices into potential revenue sources for the bank. Besides besides making or capturing these invoices as a revenue opportunity, the bank can also provide value-added services for digital invoice management. It can mean, for example, that the bank sets up an invoicing service or an online invoice management service for the SME, which is embedded into the online bank, or it can integrate the invoicing with the payment request, so it captures the data one step before the payment is initiated. So the bank can provide value-added services. The bank can also digitalize its processes based on the available structured data. So as I mentioned, payment request can be initiated from invoice data, or the payment can be initiated from the invoice data depending on the direction of the payment. And also real-time digital financing can be initiated based on the available data. So if you have the data, you can use it for several purposes within the bank. You can digitalize your processes, you can provide value-added services, and you can utilize the invoice data, which you have seen is a very rich data source compared to the already available payment data. You can use this data for data modeling, both for cash flow projections or risk modeling, or even segmentation modeling for the customers. So having the invoice data in the bank adds really value to the bank, and having invoice data within the bank enables a new generation of business banking for banks, on which the bank should and could capitalize on. And we are going back to the question, why is request to pay not happening? Just firstly, for those who don't know what request to pay is. So request to pay is not a payment means or a payment instrument. It is a messaging functionality. You can initiate, you can request a payment initiation, which complements the payment flow. And it is an enabler for digital payments. It is a message exchange which takes place before the actual payment. And what happens is that the request is sent to the payer for a payment, and the payer can accept or refuse this request. And the acceptance or the refusal will trigger the actual payment transaction happening or not happening. So it is a messaging layer, not the actual payment layer. But it is a very important layer because it provides much more information about the payment and provides more flexibility around the payment transaction than the simple payment message. And talking to several banks, I was really thinking about, this is an inevitable win-win-win use case both for the bank, both for the SME, both for the corporate customer. So why it's not happening, and the reasons that I put down also here is that request to pay is not a high priority among all other projects. So there are many projects within the bank, and request to pay is at the moment is just the last one to be implemented. But why is this? Is I think because of the general lack of understanding of opportunities regarding invoicing and invoice data, and also because there are not integrated customer journeys defined yet, and maybe the bank doesn't really know what services it can provide, how it can charge for this service. So all these things are still missing because they are quite new. And for some banks, it can only happen that although the real-time payments were already implemented, but the request to pay functionality has not been implemented yet, or if it has been implemented, then the necessary API infrastructure is not yet. So these are the things that I see. If you see or know about other things, then please put into the chat and let us discuss later. Just going back to a little bit, how request to pay will change the support of the business transactions between suppliers and buyers. The old way is that you can see that it is completely fragmented. there are no opportunities for data automation. The only structured data exchange is between the two banks, the supplier bank and the buyer bank, where the payment instruction and the payment data moves. But in the old world, there was no room for structured data exchange on an end-to-end basis. In the new way, you can see that there will be structured data exchanges between all the parties. I also put a request to pay provider besides the bank. It can be the same or it can be different in different models, but there will be many service providers, so a supplier and the buyer will both have an invoicing supplier, request to pay provider, and the bank, and all these parties should exchange data with each other. The good thing is that the data exchange will happen based on standardized data structures, and it will be defined secure infrastructure also for the data exchange for each of the cases. The problem is with all this that all this integration will take time, will be very expensive. So the catch up or take up of the service or the penetration of the service will be low if everything is done and the supplier and the buyer needs to complete 3 integrations. Then it will sure not happen because it will take too much resources. So what can be the solution is that we introduce a data consolidation layer using invoice data. So if the supplier ERP only needs to integrate once or only needs to use the already existing invoice data for sending an invoice and sending a payment request, then we are one step closer, and the take-up of the service can be faster. And what can we do if we use a data consolidation layer? Then we can also generate a payment request right from the invoice data, which will decrease the ERP integration efforts, and also it will enable 3-way reconciliation automation. So we can use both the invoice data, the payment request data, and the payment data, having everything in place, and the reconciliation can be automated for the customers. And how it can happen and why it will happen and why request to pay is such a good thing is that the customer journeys with request to pay will radically change from this current experience to this kind of future experience. Why I'm saying this is that because if we are thinking about any of the use cases that are associated or that are described in the request to pay service, both in-store payments, the e-commerce and m-commerce payments, the B2B e-invoicing and payments, and even the recurring payments include the element of e-invoicing. You always have an invoice or a bill that must be paid. In each of these situations, you will have the invoice, so you can utilize the integration of e-invoicing and request to pay. And the other thing what is important to mention, that request to pay in itself will not solve the customer's problem. So the customer's problem is that they want an end-to-end solution for their problem. They want to get paid by someone, and they want to have integrated data about all the transactions. So just simply sending a request to pay message or receiving a request to pay message, it will be good. But together with e-invoicing and together with all the data provided by the invoice, the payment request, and the payment solves the customer's problem, which is on one hand digitalizing the invoicing and payments processes, but also automation of the reconciliation problem. And why the request to pay service is good in this respect is that because it will be a pull transaction instead of a push direction for all kinds of transactions. And this means that you will have control over the data, what is put into the payment instruction. So if you generate the payment request right from the invoice, then the invoice reference number will be always in the payment request and the payment, and this will enable the transaction reconciliation automation. And as I mentioned, the invoice data, the payment request data, and the payment data together will provide a much richer data set than before, which again contributes on as the most important thing is the reconciliation automation, but also for the later data analysis capabilities of the bank. And what are the challenges before implementing the request to pay is somewhat a repetition of what was said before, but I think it is very important to make a summary on this, that banks should have the understanding, the strategic understanding how request to pay will change the whole customer experience regarding payments, how they can utilize the available invoice data. Another problem is that, which could be seen before, is the customer onboarding. So if you want to onboard corporate customers who have a lot of bills for the request to pay service, then you will need to think about the corporate integrations. And if you use the invoice data for these corporate integrations, then it will be much easier to onboard your corporate customers. And you need to think about these integrated customer journeys for corporates. What are their real problems regarding the digitalization of payments and the digitalization of the whole purchase to pay process, and how the bank can contribute to create value for their corporate customers. And if you think about these or think through these regarding your own customer base, then the request to pay service will be or can be really a game changer for your payment business within the bank. And what we provide in this respect is just a very short summary. If someone is interested, then I will be happy to share more. What we can do is that we can generate a payment request right from the invoice data using any kind of invoice data structure, so the corporate doesn't have to change anything in their ERP systems. We have set up an integrated customer journey where the corporates can present, manage, and connect invoices and payment requests and payments in one place. And we solve for the three-way reconciliation of all these data sources. For this, yes, so we can do this in any kind of ERP system, with any kind of payment system. We are already connected to a couple of payment systems, but with our technology, both the ERP integration and the payment scheme integration or banking integration can be measured in days. So it is very easy to do it with our platform, and therefore the prototyping or doing POC is also supported with our platform. So if you are thinking about a POC in this respect, just please reach out to us. And this is the delivery model. So our service can be integrated in the corporate or retail banking channels. It can be hosted on the cloud or on-premise, depending on the customer's preference. And as you can see, we can provide really the request to pay and e-invoicing API layer. We don't provide the request to pay messaging service, but we are integrated already with a couple of service providers in this respect. I will show you a short demo video what we have done with the Raiffeisen Bank in Hungary. So what you will be able to see, I will just try to make it larger, but I don't know how to do it. But so what you can see here in this video will be that how the integration of e-invoicing and request to pay can happen in the practice. So we integrated with Raiffeisen Bank Hungary's request to pay API ourselves as an enterprise customer, and we will show how an invoice is issued and how a request to pay is created from an invoice simultaneously. So you can see that we already created some invoices previously. In the layout, you can see the invoice list. You can also view the invoices. You can view the payment requests, which have already been created from the invoices. And now we are going to simulate an API call, which is the invoice issuance API call of the corporate customer. So you can see that the invoice is created, and simultaneously with the creation of the invoice, in the background, a payment request is created. You can see the invoice reference number and all the payer details. In the background, the invoice is created, and then the payment request is created. It is sent to Raiffeisen Bank request to pay API, and then it is sent in the Hungarian instant payment system to the payer's bank. And in the background, the payer in the mobile application approves the request to pay message. And you can see that within 5 seconds, the money arrives after the approval of the transaction. So you can see the new transaction in the online bank. You can check out the transaction detail in the online banking application. And we are now going back to the corporate's view, and we can see that a new invoice appears on the invoice list together with you can see the invoice reference number, and you can also see that the payment request was already done. So the status has changed to done, and this will enable the automatic reconciliation. So this is how request to pay request to pay service can be brought to life with the help of e-invoicing. I think this is what I wanted to say for today, and we are really waiting for the discussion.
Thank you very much, Katalin. I like your presentations very much, always very informative. And I wanted, maybe let's bring to the audience, while they're thinking on the questions, the article that we discussed with you this week, and that you shared with me and me discussed. And let's share about this interesting case that OTP Bank in Hungary. published, recently, a very good, not a press release, but let's call it publication, kind of a story for the consumers, how request to pay can be used within the customers, right? So
Yes.
this was an example for the consumers, and there was described a good story with really good illustrations. I would say that there is a group of friends, and they gather together during some vacations, and one of the friends, which is the main hero of the main character of the story, likes to cook and cook for everybody when they gather for these vacations, and he always do the grocery.
Yes.
Right, he always does the grocery, and then afterwards he is awkward to ask his friends, like, to split this course and to share this course between them, and this is like a really problem for them.
Yes, that's a real life problem. Yes.
A real life problem, yes. And then if when there appears a solution as request to pay, then it's come easier. He's sending this request to pay as a link, and friends are happy to contribute and to pay the costs. For me, this is a very good illustration and example how it can works in business as well. And I think this is one of the main advantages of request to pay, because usually, businesses, especially, SMEs, they're very good in doing their core business, like, delivering the goods, providing the services, but they're usually not very good in these financial questions, and they're really very often awkward to ask, please pay me because I delivered. And this is a very good, a really great solution, effortless, helping to cover these payments and the liquidity gap very fast. And this is also convenient for the customers because it's easy to pay, right? So I do like this example very much. If you can also comment maybe from the publication how it was discussed in Hungary, because it was in Hungarian, and the one that I could understand when translating.
Yes, why I like this thing, because the bank tried really to describe it as a very everyday story,
Yeah.
and they I think showed very well that in these very simple situations, but it can be awkward situations, how can you use the new service? So what you need to know about the Hungarian market is instant payments have already been introduced. They are mandatory for a certain below a certain threshold, and the national bank also pushes the request to pay functionality a lot, but not all the banks, so only a couple of banks have started to actually capitalize on request to pay. One of them is Raiffeisen Bank, who is more active in the corporate sector, and OTP Bank is more, or becoming, because it's a recent article, is becoming more active in the retail sector. But it's really good that how they are trying to bring the use case close to the consumer. Yeah. So I
Right.
was really happy to and enthusiastic to read this article. At least they started to promote the request to pay functionality, which I was waiting for a long time already.
Yes. So we're looking forward for the examples for business customers as well, right?
Yes, so the next I very much hope will be the SME use case. So how a hairdresser can, send
Yes.
request pay
Yes.
to the customers, or how plumber can send the
Yeah.
request pay, or how a taxi driver can send the
Yeah.
request pay to the
Yeah.
customer. Because
Because
they can do the invoice issuance, and then sending the invoice and all together with the request to pay, instead of a card payment, which will be easier. And in
exactly.
Central European markets who are very price sensitive, I think it will matter.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a question from David. Thank you, David, for your question. So let's read it and answer. So, when do you consider that request to pay will be a market standard at the European level? Do you think that the banks are ready?
Yes, I think so. It's coming. It's not there yet for I think for two reasons. One is that there are domestic schemes in a lot of countries already live, but there is still ongoing discussion about the specifications of the SEPA request to pay. So this will need to be finalized, but it will definitely come. And the other driver will be the e-invoicing regulations.
Mm-hmm.
So wherever e-invoicing is coming, then request to pay will be a relevant use case because you can link the two things together. I know that a big bank, the DZ Bank in Germany, recently launched a request to pay platform.
Mm-hmm.
I know that, for example, uh, banks banks in France are thinking about there will be a coming regulation in 2024, and there the regulation also the invoicing regulation also includes things about the payment. So it will itself the e-invoicing regulation will make the payment request functionality relevant on the market. Uh, I know that in Italy also work is going on regarding the formulation of the request to pay scheme. So I expect the next 1 2 years will be crucial for this.
Mm-hmm.
So fingers crossed. And then
Yes.
this is from the market side, but from the banking side, it will depend on how banks prioritize their own projects.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yes.
I see a huge opportunity for the banks in this respect.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is an opportunity that should not be missed.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's a low hanging fruit. It's not very difficult to implement, so it's not like a very difficult use case. You don't have to do too much, but you can gain a lot.
Mm-hmm. Let's get back to the stoppers that you mentioned during the presentation, or the challenges. So, what stops or what are the obstacles for the banks to implement both in e-invoicing and request to pay? Because for me, yes, I do also believe that now this is a very good moment for the banks to do this, because as you mentioned, the e-invoicing regulations will make obligatory e-invoicing here in the European Union for the next 2-3 years. And I do believe that banks will be the best providers of e-invoicing services, because, well, first, in this sense, they can be a trusted provider for the business customers, especially for SMEs, who does not have time to check all the legislations, regulations, and everything. Second is that banks can easily integrate it with the payments, exactly, which is crucial. I think the customers do not want to have separate platforms, separate for invoicing, separate for payment. This is becoming too difficult. This all tools should be integrated. This is the main point here. And for the banks, this is a great opportunity to become such a provider, implement e-invoicing, integrate with the payments, integrate with other services like factoring, like online accounting, maybe together with the partners. And in this way, they will have all the picture of their business customers. What you could wish more? I mean, you have all the data on the customers, and you can first receive new revenue streams, and second, as you mentioned, do the segmentation, do the risk models, and personalize the offer as much as you can. I mean, this is the deepest data that you can retain from the market, and banks have this opportunity to do this right now. From my side, there are two. I mean, what I hear here in the region, that there are two main stoppers that I would like to discuss with you. Is that first is the knowledge, is that, as you mentioned, this is new. on the market, and this is new to the banks. They didn't have this experience before, and they don't have they do not have knowledge inside the organizations. So how to overcome them? Can partners help in this sense, that they really help implementing this solution, help also to organize the customer journey, and also how to sell this as well to the customers? So this is first. And second, let us discuss about the digital maturity of the banks, whether it should be, because we all know that digital onboarding of the business customer, this is not a common thing still in the CE region. Is it connected? What should be first? Should this digital journey happen first, and then banks should integrate e-invoicing with request to pay, or it can be done simultaneously?
Okay, so for the first question, it's just I think the most important thing is to have the strategic understanding within the bank, because after that, if you decided that you want to pursue this use case, then you can find the partners already. So either, we exactly provide such a technology and such a service, but it's not only us. There are, other players that can develop or set up service, or the bank can partner with the third-party providers. But the most important thing is to have this understanding that, what I want to do for my customers, for my SME customers, what will be, what I want to be in the offering. And then the how question arises: how will I do that? Will I do it within the bank, with a partner? It will depend on the bank's strategy. But first, the banks should have really the understanding that we should have the invoice data somehow, either generated by us or by getting from third-party sources in some ways. So that is the
Right.
first question. And yeah, for digital maturity, it's I don't think that the bank should wait for for other use cases. It can be even be a just a spin-off of the bank. So the two banks we work with just implemented this use case as a spin-off. So you don't have to even put it into the whole banking application, or you don't have to link it with the digital onboarding process. It's again, it can depend on what the bank wants do and how it wants to serve these SME customers. For example, if you are just changing your whole internet banking into a new one, then it makes sense for you to rethink the whole service offering. But if you have just implemented one, then you need to think about differently. So it will differ from bank by bank, but I wouldn't say it should stop from a bank from not being fully digital already, because you can start small.
Okay.
You can connect via the banking interfaces from an outside application, and you can define the customer journeys in a way that the customer will not even know that it uses two separate applications.
Yes, we have another question from Alban. To your opinion, should or will the data consolidation layer pertain to ERPs or banks or independent services, kind of setups?
I think the short answer is that the important thing is that it happens. It happens by it is done by the ERP or the bank or the independent startup. It is a secondary thing. From our perspective, we promote that the bank should provide these value-added services and value-added APIs both to the ERPs and the corporate customers as part of their API stack on which they are working already. But if it will be an open ecosystem, so it will not be a monopoly for banks to do this. And anyone who sees the opportunity and can put together the business case will jump on it. So I think it is sooner or later ERPs will jump on it. There are independent startups or invoicing service providers. They will also jump on it because it makes sense. Simply, it makes sense. uh, I think it is in the best interest of the bank to have the capability within, but it will really depend who is fast and who what sees in their strategy or what or the vision of the service providers. But from a efficiency point of view, the important thing that it is done by someone at least.
Mm-hmm. To wrap up the webinar, Katalin, how do you think? What is this breaking point when banks start or input the invoicing into the banking strategy? You mentioned mindset at the beginning. This
Yes,
is a difficult thing, to change. How do
yes,
you think? What is this breaking point? What should happen? Because I do would like that all the banks have it. It's very
yes.
convenient for the customers.
What we see on the market is that the first birds are already out there,
Mm-hmm.
and then I think there will be uh, more and more banks following it, and and that's what I can say. But really, what I really see from talking to people in banks, that even if one person understands, it's not enough if one person understands. All the bank or the a majority of the people in the bank should have this mindset. And I understand that this is a very difficult thing to do because uh, on a personal level, even you need to make a leapfrog. So it's not only that the bank needs to make a leapfrog as an organization, but the people inside will need to think differently, and they will need to have an understanding. But I think this is a much broader discussion
Mm-hmm.
uh, than this. But yeah, so I think on one hand, the strategic understanding is important, and then if everyone does this, then everyone should do this, because it will not be a competitive edge after some time, but it will be more like something that you must do. It's like when you had the internet banking at first, only a couple of banks had it. After that everyone has it, and it will be really not only the invoicing application itself. We think that it should be in the bank because it is in the best place in the bank, but what the bank needs to understand, that it should have access somehow to the invoice data and make and be able to work with the invoice data.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Yes.
is the capability that the bank should have somehow. And this again leads to another discussion, which we will discuss also on the conference in
Conference,
Prague,
right.
that the banks should have the capability to work with the standardized data structure, and why it is so good, and why it is, and why open banking is so important. So this whole thing is just, one big topic, uh,
Yes.
just with different slices, or use broken into different slices, or use cases.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, it will be more like a general way of how banking is done or will be done in the
Mm-hmm.
future.
Yes, yes, and I do believe that with that webinar we contributed and brought this knowledge, and you know um, made this topic a bit closer to all our attendees. because yes, this is a very good moment now to enter the e-invoicing area, because this already is competitive advantage and distinguishes banks on the market, and I think this will be only increasing and accelerating. Okay, so thank you. Let's wrap up the webinar. Thank you very much, Katalin, as usual, for your presentation and for your contribution. Thank you all our participants for your questions. And yes, we will share the presentation and the recording after we finish. Thank you very much, and see you next time online during the next webinars and at our upcoming conference on November 25th, physical and in person in Prague and also online. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Yeah, thank you everyone for attending, and see you in Prague.